Rebecca, how do I refinance after a divorce? This is a really good question, and I'm excited to answer it. Hey guys, my name's Rebecca Green. I'm a real estate divorce specialist, and on this channel, we just answer all the questions that you have about divorce. I'm going to answer it exactly how it was asked, and then we're going to talk about a few things that you may not know as far as real estate investing, lending options. Can I refinance after a divorce? Yes, and most likely you're going to have to. If you're the house spouse in a divorce, meaning you've chosen to keep the house and your spouse has moved out, they are the out spouse, then you've got to find some way to get them off of the documents, the title, the loan for the house because they no longer live there. And what could happen in really contentious divorce situations down the road when you decide to sell, you get a new partner, you whatever, want to keep the house as an investment property, the worst thing that could happen is your spouse is still attached to the house. So we want to get them off of the house, off of the loan, off the insurance, all these little things. And if you choose to work with me as your divorce real estate agent, I've got a process to help you with all of that. But let's get down to business here and answer the question, can I refinance after a divorce? Yep, and you should. Here's what it's going to look like. You're going to probably in your divorce documents, there's most likely a clause that will say, hey, Rebecca has 90 days after the divorce to refinance. This number is really important because if you're refinancing, there's a good chance that you are giving your spouse some money from the proceeds of this refinance. Typically, a house is one of a couple's largest assets in a divorce, and so they'll start to do what's called an equalization, where once you move out and the divorce is finalized, I'm going to give you your portion of the equity in the home when I refinance. That check just goes to you, and now we're done. Something that can be really difficult for people sometimes is there could be one partner that really wants the house, everybody has agreed, and we're good to go. Finances change in a divorce, though, and unfortunately, that's one of the biggest pieces that can really mess things up. People lose jobs, people change friend groups and locations and school districts, and things can get really messy, even to the extent sometimes that I've got clients who thought they were going to keep the house. We got the out spouse in a new home, everybody's good to go, and all of a sudden the house spouse can't keep the house anymore. Maybe they acquired too much debt. Maybe they bought a new car. There's all sorts of things that happen with credit scores and things over the course of a divorce that can make it really difficult for someone to refinance. So if this is something that you're thinking about, my best advice is to get started moving on this process sooner than later. How it works when you refinance during a divorce is you're typically going to need some type of a signed divorce decree stating that both you and your spouse agree that you can keep the house and that you need to refinance it within XYZ number of days. What you'll do is you'll call your current lender and you'll say, hey, I need to refinance. I always tell people to ask if you have an interest rate that you want to be able to keep. You need to call your bank, tell them what's going on, and see if your loan is one that qualifies to have an assumable mortgage. In that case, instead of pulling out a whole new refinancing your house in that way, you might want to pull out a home equity line of credit, which is where you have your current mortgage. And let's say your house is worth this much. You basically pull out a little line of credit on this difference. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do it. That's going to be a conversation with you and your lender, the house spouse. Once you know for sure that you're going to keep the house, you can kind of start those conversations going forward. If you decide to totally refinance the house, meaning you had a loan with your partner before, we want to get them off the loan, and you're going to promise now that you'll make the mortgage payment in your own name. They'll run your financials, they'll pull your credit, they'll make sure you're good to go and that you can afford the house, and you'll get a brand new loan on your old house at today's rates. This can be really good for a lot of things because it's a clean break. A lot of times what happens in a divorce is a couple has owned a house for a certain amount of time. Now there's equity that they've built into the house. So refinancing the home gives you access to that equity. Maybe in your divorce decree, you've agreed to pay that equity to your spouse. Maybe in your divorce decree, they kept your retirement and you now decide that you want to refinance the house and have access to a little bit of extra cash. I'll tell you how it worked for one of my clients. She and her husband decided that she would keep the house, he would keep the retirement, and she refinanced her house. The house was worth $300,000. They owed $150,000 on it. So when she went and got a brand new loan on the house, they paid off the $150,000, and she went ahead and pulled out a $200,000 loan on the home because her bank let her do that. It was worth $300,000. She only wanted a loan for $200,000, and they're like, sure, go for it. She then took that equity, put it in a bank account, and set herself up in a way financially that she felt a lot better going forward. She felt more stable. These are conversations that are really good to have with your attorney, with your financial advisor, with your life coach, with your therapist about how to leverage the financial assets that you have to set yourself up for a better life moving forward. Something that I want to caution you here, it can be really scary when you see your spouse moving on in a way without you, because no matter how toxic the marriage was, you're like, oh my gosh, they're going to have a better life than me. What am I going to do? They're more stable. They have better finances. And at the end of the day, what's the most important in a divorce is that we make sure that everybody walks away in a way that they feel comfortable with. And you may not like how it ends up, but if you do, what's my number one piece of advice, and get all of your assets on a piece of paper and start to pull things out and figure out who keeps what, then at the very least, at the end of the day, you know that they walked away with a piece of the pie, you walked away with an equal piece of the pie, or at least something that you both agreed to. Now you can start using those assets. So having a home in a divorce has a lot of good things. There's a lot of reasons we love this. As a real estate agent, I actually didn't keep my personal residence in our divorce, and I even had kids. We moved into a rental for a little while and chose to reset in that way. But if you've chosen to keep the house and you're looking at a refinance on your property, one of the best things you can do is just reach out to a local lender who you trust. If you're here in the Kansas City area, I'm happy to connect you with some of the professionals that I know who specialize in the divorce niche as well, because there's lots of moving pieces, lots of extra documents that you have to have that makes this whole process really important, that you get your ducks in a row, because the last thing you want to do 10 years down the road is have to call your ex and be like, hey, I met somebody, I'm moving out, we're selling the house for $1,000 more than I bought it from you for 3 years. It just gets all weird, and you don't want to do that. So when you're refinancing, there's some very specific steps that you want to take. A lending professional who's good in this industry will be able to walk you through that. But hopefully that answers your question about how do you refinance after a divorce. You're going to call your lender, you're going to give them their information, you're going to be completely honest with them about your situation, because these people are in your world to help you. You've got to have a team of people who are going to give you advice and guidance and can really walk you through the process of what it looks like to give up your family home or to keep your family home, making sure that you know everything that's involved with that. One other thing that I do want to note here: when you refinance a property, the lender's going to send out an appraiser. And the appraiser's job is to figure out how much the house is worth based on comparable sales in the neighborhood. Now, an appraiser is going to use the same numbers, most likely, that a real estate agent is going to use to figure out the value of a home. If you're refinancing, then most likely you've already agreed to a price with your spouse about, hey, we think the house is worth $500,000. She's going to refinance so she can give him the money. This is where things can get a little bit complicated, because the lender is going to send out an appraiser, and the appraiser is going to give you a price for the house. Sometimes that price exactly matches the contract price that you're trying to pull out a loan for. Sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower. This number can really muddy the waters. I'll give you an example. Let's say that my spouse and I decide to sell this, or that I'm going to keep the house. We both think it's worth $500,000. When the appraiser comes out, he may pop in and be like, hey, actually, I'd give you a loan for $600,000 on this. For whatever reason, maybe his numbers are off from the real estate agent's numbers or the numbers that you and your spouse agreed to. You need to make sure that you have this in writing and that you've agreed to the number already, because what can happen is that can open up a whole new can of worms, where now your spouse, who previously agreed to X number of proceeds for the house at $500,000, when they get wind that it's worth $600,000, there's going to be some back and forth there. So making sure that's an actual fair market value, and once we've agreed, is really important. That's why whenever I sit down with people to help them figure out what to do with the home in a divorce, we agree on a number right there. And at the end of the day, it may be $5,000 to $10,000 different than somebody else would come in and give you a number for. But if both spouses are looking at the same photos, sometimes I can do this with them in the same room. Sometimes they hate each other so much, I'll sit down with the husband first, I'll sit down with the wife second, and I'll kind of serve as an intermediary there. But agreeing on that number up front can really help the negotiation process going forward, and helps to alleviate a lot of the questions in the long run, because sometimes you just have to put your flag in the ground and say, this is where we're at with it. So hopefully that's helpful. Instructions for refinancing in a divorce: call your lender, know how much your house is worth, and make sure that your financiers are stable at the time that you are going to be refinancing the house. The lender's going to have some questions on that too. So if you want to reach out, I'm pretty easy to find on social media here on YouTube, and I'm happy to help.